Hey everyone, welcome to Google Digital Days Meena. My name is Sachin, a Google developer expert. And in this session, we'll actually be learning how to build immersive visual games for the Google Assistant. A quick and brief introduction about myself. I'm a Google developer expert, especially for the Google Assistant field. I'm also the Chief Technology Officer at Tuplo Life, which is a connected healthcare company based out of Dallas. I also head the Google developer groups in Doha. So if you'd like to connect with me, you can always reach out to me via Twitter using the handle Sachin underscore ATK. And a lot of these tutorials as well as sessions are covered under techwithsuch.com. If you're a fan of Medium, you can always check all of these topics under the Medium post as well. So before we actually get on to the actual session, a lot of people actually ask me when I go and speak to a lot of conferences. They ask me, "What's your inspiration?" I mean, to me, the inspiration started way back when I was a kid. And if anyone who's actually familiar with this slide, let me know in the comments section, because Star Trek has inspired a lot of has been an inspiration for a lot of technology change around the world. And as a kid, while growing up, I've noticed something in Star Trek, and I just wanted to share this with you all. So let's have a look at this.
Library computer. History files. Update. Former Governor Codus of Tarsus 4, also known as Codus the Executioner. After that, background on actor Anton.
So here you can see the captain actually interacting with a computer.
Codus the Executioner. Summary. Governor of Tarsus 4, 20 Earth years ago, invoked martial law, slaughtered 50%.
So again over here, if you actually look at it, he's actually interacting with the computer in the form of voice. Now, when we talk about voice, and with the birth of the Google Assistant, Alexas in the world, we've been thinking that, okay, the whole voice conversational or voice app or voice first actions have come into place in the past few years. But in fact, if you actually go back in time, this was a series started in something around 1970s, and you can actually see the vision was casted way back then. So talking of voice assistants from there, so that was my inspiration. So I've always looked up to how can we make computing more user friendly? What's the best way for us to compute and get the right information at the right time without actually going through a lot of interfaces or interactions. So voice being the most natural way that humans communicate, this is the best way to actually build something for a conversational action. Now, speaking of voice assistants, the first thing that comes to our mind is the Google Assistant. So the Google Assistant is nothing but your own personal assistant from Google to get things done in the most helpful and useful manner, right? So from a Google Assistant standpoint, why is it important for you as developers, right? So why is it important for you as developers to build something for the Google Assistant? So Google has been investing heavily in the areas of machine learning, speech recognition, language understanding. So with these three areas, all of these three areas comes together in the form of the Google Assistant. So the Google Assistant allows you to have a conversation with Google that will help you get things done in the most useful manner. Now, because of these investment in AI, the conversation can be completely natural. Like, for example, use your voice, ask the Google Assistant in a natural way, and the assistant is always there to help you. Now, from a developer standpoint, okay, all of this is great, but what is it for me as a developer? Why would I need to build something for the Google Assistant. That's because, as you can see in the slide, the Google Assistant is already available across 1 billion plus devices. We're not talking about just Android phones. We're talking about Android phones, iPhones, TVs, cars, smart speakers, smart watches, Chromebooks, headphones, and there's a lot of other devices that's coming out in the market day by day with the Google Assistant integrated. Now, as a developer, compared to, let's say, building a mobile application for a specific platform, you're limited to that specific platform. Now, with Google Assistant, you're already your application can be reached across all of these 1 billion plus devices. And we'll get there and how we can do that. And since this topic for today is mainly around how to build immersive visual games for the Google Assistant, we'll be focusing majorly on the Google Home Hub or smart displays, or in fact, even your Android phones. Okay, so from a smart display standpoint, it was launched in around 2019. So over the course of 2019 itself, you can see that the percentage of smart homes that included a smart display increased by 4 times. Now, again, these numbers are way back. There are updated numbers right now, but I'm just giving you a glimpse of how much growth it is when people who have already having a smart home are adopting smart displays. And an increasing number of people are already engaging with smart displays. So with this session, we'll be also looking at an API called Interactive Canvas. So the Interactive Canvas API is the main driver which actually supports this. So let's actually look at some of the few examples. Now, games and assistant. So first, let's talk about games on Assistant today. The past 2 years, we have seen a good traction with voice games on Google Assistant. Developers have crafted like a lot of games which are game-based, where you have the ability to interact with the Google Assistant with multiple people at home, just talking to it and having a casual time playing games. So now, with this growth, these games have been successful at creating an immersive experience in an audio-only environment, right? So when I say audio-only environment, we are talking about the Google Home, the smart speakers without display. So they have actually quite gained a lot of popularity. Now, with a smart display, how can we actually leverage these games on on a device with display? So that's when we have devices like the Nest Hub or the Home Hub. If you guys already have those devices out there, you can actually go and build actions for that and immediately see it on your smart display. Now, this doesn't mean that whatever we are speaking today is very specific to just smart displays. Even your phones is an example of a display, a device with a display with the Google Assistant in it. Now, this is actually a game where you can actually try it out in your Google Home Hub or Nest Hub. And if you're not finding this due to, let's say, depending on where you are, if it's not available in your region, I would highly recommend try the call center action. So the call center action is a wonderful experience where you can actually see how you can build for an immersive game for the Google Assistant. Now, all of this is actually powered with an API called Interactive Canvas. Now, we've kind of seen how we are using smart home devices like smart speakers. like Google Home or Google Home Minis, where you're interacting with your action just via voice. Now, that itself is a great experience, but let's imagine an experience where you can combine both visual as well as audio responses back to the user. Now, again, if you're interested, go and do some research about how a conversational application and with a display actually helps you in a lot of ways. But again, from this session standpoint, all I can say is I find this to be one of the coolest way to kind of actually interact with your customers or with your users by just having a combination of both visual as well as a conversational piece attached to it. Now, keep in mind, most of these devices, or even the Google Assistant, primarily is focused on voice driven. Now, here, we are not going to build web apps and web applications that we already have out there to kind of mimic us people to go and interact with it. Yes, of course, these smart displays and your Android phones definitely can be used to have touch interactions. That is also part of this specific API. But as a developer, you need to make sure that most of these conversations are voice driven. So, as part of the interactive canvas, it's an API that enables pixel level control in rendering HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So, interactive canvas actually leverages the power of the web. So, most of us are very familiar with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So anyone with this knowledge can quickly dive and build interactive canvas applications. So some of the features that's highlighted, you can see it's full screen visuals, animations and transitions can be added to your conversations, video playbacks can be done, data visualizations, custom layouts and fonts can be used. So now all of these elements kind of take your conversations to a completely new level. So you'd wonder, how does it all work, right? So if you guys have attended some of the previous sessions where we built a voice action from scratch using Dialogflow and actions on Google, this slide over here would be very familiar to you. Now, of course, the way, even if you have not seen those sessions, I can actually explain this slide in a very simple manner. So let's assume that you're interacting with you're interacting with your device. So let's say in this case, it can be a Google Home, or it could be your mobile phone, or it could be your smart displays. Now, when you're having a conversation with the device captures this information. That is, the Google Assistant captures this information, and then the actions on Google platform is initiated. Now, the actions on Google platform is responsible to take that conversation and give it to Dialogflow. Now, you'd be asking, what is Dialogflow? So Dialogflow is a conversational design platform where you actually go and build your conversations or design your conversations. Okay, it's an amazing tool where you can go and build conversations with no coding to begin with, and all you need to do is to make sure what would be the typical kind of responses that your users would interact with your action with. So it's as easy as training your action or application to just see what the users would actually converse with. Now, from Dialogflow, of course, the Dialogflow matches the user's intent. So it has understood that you have said something. The Dialogflow receives it. Now I've received a conversation. Now, based on what you have built within your action, Dialogflow will understand, okay, this person is actually meaning this specific intent. So let me give it to that specific intent. Now, Dialogflow handles that specific conversation to that intent, And within that intent, you can always have a fulfillment to kind of invoke your logic and then provide a response back to the device. So in simpler terms, you talk to the device, actions on Google platform hands off to Dialogflow. Dialogflow matches the user's response to an intent, and then it will also invoke a fulfillment logic to provide a response back to the user. Now, the response back can be a simple response or it could be a rich response. So a simple response can be saying like a welcome message or a greeting message, hi, how can I help? Or greetings. Now, a rich response can be, let's say, based on the conversation that you're having, you can basically display like a card, right, with some information on it, like tag, title, image, and so on. So that's a life cycle of a traditional conversation action, right? Now, the only difference when we are talking about interactive canvas is we have an additional layer called HTML response. The purpose of the HTML response is to tell the device to where to fetch the web app. Now, if you actually look back at the screen, right, we have a visual display, we have something visually rendered on the screen, and where does all of this come from? So that's actually a web app which is rendered onto the smart display. Now, from a conversational standpoint, you need to have something from Dialogflow to indicate that this needs to be a web app which needs to be loaded. So how would you actually send that information? That is actually notified using a new response called HTML response. So the purpose of the HTML response is to tell the device to where to fetch the web app. At the same time, it can also send data to the client. So with any additional information, it could be like a string, or it could be like any JSON object that you want to pass. So as of this step, the HTML response will have like a URL, right, indicating where your web app is. So your web app is loaded onto the device. And then you'll also have to pass the information back and forth, right? So in that's where the interactive canvas API comes into play. So the interactive canvas API is loaded within your web app, which is then responsible to send. So for example, if you are talking to your application over here, Dialogflow needs to understand what the conversation is. So interactive canvas is the API that's responsible for capturing that, as well as any state within your game, and then send it back to Dialogflow, the fulfillment, and then back to the user. So I hope this specific slide makes sense. So it's a very simple additional layer using HTML response and a web app. So if you have used conversational actions before, if you have used Dialogflow and actions on Google platform before, this is a very small addition that you need to do, but it adds in a lot of functionalities and features. So let's actually move further and have a look at a code. So the canvas is supported on smart displays and Android phones. Now, when we are talking about these kind of devices, now, of course, when you're writing your application, you'd be building it for multiple surfaces. When I say surface, what I'm referring to over here is a surface can be a smart speaker, so it doesn't have a display. It can be a phone. It can be your smart display, which has a screen, right? So these are called surface capabilities. Now, as a developer, we need to check the surface capability. Why? Because we need to identify the responses while we are building our backend. We need to identify whether the response that we send is for a smart speaker or a smart display, right? So typically when you build these kind of conversational actions, you have to make sure you kind of handle both. So you can have a condition, and I'll get there, how you can write those conditions separately for interactive canvas and identifying the surface capabilities and then adding the appropriate responses back. Now, the Node.js client library, HTML response, is what we kind of discussed earlier. So this HTML response will carry key information like the URL of the web app that needs to be rendered onto the screen, along with any other optional data. So you see over here, the optional data could be anything. It could be the state of your game or any information that is actually required for you to build more immersive visual games. So for example, let's have a look at one of the code examples here. So this is a fulfillment. And before even I start walking through this code, I would like to kind of reiterate. You might be wondering towards the entire session, I'm referring to interactive canvas with games. Now, I'm sure a lot of you out there who's actually watching this would be wondering, wow, this is actually great. I have a lot of applications that I have web apps already. I can actually leverage this and kind of build applications, meaningful applications or cool applications with the interactive canvas. So as of now, as of this date, Google has opened interactive canvas only for games. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. So that's number one. The second thing to keep in mind is interactive canvas gives you the ability to render your web app onto the smart display. That doesn't mean that you actually build applications just like your traditional web applications. And we will get to that specific section while we are looking into some design guidelines. Okay, but the main thing that I wanted to put across is interactive canvas at this point is built for building visual games. So if you're a developer and you like to build an action with a specific game category, you can go ahead and use interactive canvas right away and then submit your application to Google. So coming back, so we are here with a fulfillment code. So let's take a look at what a fulfillment looks like, right? So typically a user would say, hey, Google, or I'm sorry if I triggered some Google Homes out there. So let's say if you say, hey, G, talk to so-and-so action or talk to awesome action X. The first intent that gets triggered would be the default welcome intent. So this again, for viewers out there who don't understand what are intents, what are entities, and all of that, I would highly recommend that you go and visit some of our past tutorials where we have done live sessions or workshops from start to finish. But do not worry, at the end of this specific session as well, I'll give you some tutorial links as well as videos to get started. Now, the first intent that gets triggered while you initiate your action is the default welcome intent. So here you can see the response is welcome to Canvas workshop. So that's a simple response. Now, along with that, you need to also check whether this specific action supports interactive canvas. So if this action is being triggered by, let's say, a smart display or a mobile phone, it will check whether that conversation.surface.has the interactive canvas capability. If it has, then you can send a HTML response, right? Instead of a simple response, you can actually send a HTML response. An HTML response, you can see the key information that we are passing as part of that is one, which is the URL. So the URL will be the web app that is being rendered onto the display. And the second one would be the data. So you'd ask what this data means. So this data can be anything, right? So let's say when you're building games, it's very important to kind of understand there's a lot of data that you need to pass back and forth between the user, depending on the state of the game, right? So here you can see as an example, we are passing scene state and we are passing it as welcome. And depending on where your user is within your application, you can actually send welcome, you can send another state to identify, okay, this is a different state right now, depending on the conversation that the user, the dialog flow has received. Let's assume that we had another intent and dialog based on the conversation that the user just interacted with your game. It would come to dialog flow. Dialog flow would understand that, okay, this is not the welcome intent. It is to do with some other game intent. Now, within that game intent, you would want to pass a different scene state so that it can be rendered back onto your web application, right? So that's where this specific parameter and value would come into play. So what is a web app? A web app is the web page that is being rendered onto these devices: HTML, JavaScript, CSS, WebAssembly. So anyone familiar with any of these web technologies, you're good to go building interactive canvas applications, right? And the recommended way is to make sure that you have a single page application, because to avoid reloading the same page across intents to ensure a seamless UI experience. And also to make sure that there's no flickering, because you're loading the same thing over and over again through different screens. So if it's a single page application, the users would have a smooth, seamless experience. The web app will also include the interactive canvas JavaScript library. And you can also use popular JavaScript frameworks and libraries. So since we are building games over here, any popular framework like Pixie, Fraser.js, 3JS. So I'll show you an example towards the end of this session, how I've used 3JS, HTML, JavaScript, and built a simple game, a 3D game, which is actually rendered onto a smart display. So you'd be wondering what a basic web app would look like. Again, this is a very simple template, normal HTML file. You can put any kind of messages or designs that you would like. The key thing that you need to keep in mind is to include the interactive canvas API. So all you have to do is you design your web app, add all of your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and along with that, add this specific script, which is the interactive canvas API. Okay. And the next one would be your main JavaScript file. Again, it depends on how you want to kind of lay. So this would be your main entry point of the client-side application. So as part of the web app loading process, interactive canvas is imported and initialized. So the interactive canvas is the API that actually allows you to interface with your action. So any information that you're passing from your client side or from your web app, the way how you communicate it back to actions on Google, Dialogflow, is through interactive canvas. Okay. And the interactive canvas also helps you register callbacks using the ready method. So we'll actually look into some of those codes right now. So as you can see in this specific main.js file, within the callback, you have an update method. So this update function carries this data. Now this data can be anything. It can be any JSON object. Within this JSON object, you can pass the key information that's required, and then you can just use interactive canvas.ready and pass the callback. So any information that goes back and forth from your client side is carried over using the interactive canvas API. So hope this part of the session is clear, because this is the main area where you'd be actually using interactive canvas. Now here's a sample code with some more information on it, right? So you remember in the previous slides, we looked at when we are sending information from a fulfillment from our backend, we had a HTML response that is being sent. Now, as part of that HTML response, we had two parameters, which was the URL, and the other one was the state or data. Now, that data is the one that's being called over here. So that is being passed on to this specific function. And within this callback, you can see that you check what is the scene state. If it is welcome, then output this specific welcome message. If it is some other scene state, you can actually have another function which renders the information onto the screen. So depending on that, you can actually use these APIs to actually have a single page application where you get the state of the scene and you render the information like your web page using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript within the application. So in that case, the user would have like one screen where the information is constantly changing because he's having a conversation. You're getting the state or the data through your callbacks, and the information is immediately reflected back onto the game. So we will update the UI on the device based on these callbacks. So far we've talked about how to handle the HTML response. So what about sending the request from client to the server? So that's typically done using send text query. Right? So for example, how would when we are having a conversation, or when the user has a conversation with these devices, we need a way to capture that conversation from that specific web app and then send it back to our Dialogflow and fulfillment, right? So that's typically done using send text query. So it's useful for interactive objects and asynchronous intent invocations. So let's have a look at some of those over here, right? So we have an image element which is listening to a click event, right? So when this image is clicked by a user, it invokes the function called send do something, which in turn actually calls the interactive canvas dot send text query with a specific string. So this string value is then passed on to Dialogflow, where Dialogflow understands, okay, this is something that I've got back from the user, right? Because the main reason why we are using this is with interactive canvas, you're not just having voice conversation. The user can also click on or interact with your application via touch or clicks, right? So in that case, we need to have a way for Dialogflow to understand that, okay, what is that I need to process right now? So that is typically done with interactive canvas.send text query. So when something is clicked on the screen, you understand that, okay, this click event has happened. Now, within that click event, since this is a voice driven application, let me use interactive canvas dot send text query, send that information back onto Dialogflow. Now, Dialogflow, the moment it receives something like this, will understand, okay, this person is talking about a specific intent. Let me pass it to that intent. And within that intent, it would have another fulfillment logic. And then the HTML response is then sent back to the user, which is then again rendered back onto the screen. So that's how simple it is to kind of use interactive canvas along with your conversations. So for first time beginners, if you're looking at all of these code and thinking, okay, none of this makes sense because of the way how it is right now, I would highly recommend that you actually go through the code labs that's provided by Google on building conversational actions or applications. So once you complete the first 3 code labs, and when you come back here, all of this would completely make sense and it would be very easy for you. So that was all about building or coding for using interactive canvas. Now, the main thing to keep in mind is interactive canvas gives you the ability to build immersive interactive visual games for the Google Assistant, right? And if you are a developer, this is interactive canvas is quite new, and we'll be so excited if you guys can build something and publish, and do let us know in the comments or through Twitter, or ping me in Twitter and let me know what you guys have built using interactive canvas. So we've kind of understood the basic fundamentals of what a voice assistant is. What does a conversational action mean? What is Actions on Google? Actions on Google is a developer platform where you can extend the functionalities of the Google Assistant. And what is Dialogflow? Dialogflow is a conversational platform where you can design your conversations. So we've understood all of that. And then we came into visual displays or smart displays and how we can build for that. And that's when we saw the power of Interactive Canvas API, which basically leverages the power of the web or web technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which will enable you to build visually engaging and immersive games, which is voice driven. So that is the most important thing, which is voice driven. So here, as you can see, that's where we get into some of the design principles. So make sure your action or application, voice application, is voice forward, or it is voice driven. It is very tempting for us as developers to make sure that when we go out there, when we look at interactive canvas, we'll be like, oh, I've already had a web application. Let me actually go and take that and add the interactive canvas API, and I will have something up and ready quickly. But that's not the actual way of doing it. Because here, typically when we're looking at smart displays, of course, your phone is fine. But when we are looking at smart displays, it has limited capabilities. It's not supposed to be a touch screen as a major driver. What you have to do is it's all based on voice. And again, we are here to build conversational actions now, which is voice driven. So when we are building a voice first application, the first thing that we need to make sure that we do is build or design your game mainly driven by your voice, and interact with your people. So if you have multiple users over there, you have to make sure that you allow them to socially engage with you based on their voice. So engage with your users with back and forth conversations instead of using commands. Always think about building an interactive story. So again, unlike your mobile screens and web applications, traditional web applications, where you are going and clicking buttons, you're limited to those constraints. Now, when it comes to voice, the user can have any kind of conversation back to the user, back to your action. So it's very important you kind of take into consideration that you lead the user, right? So you direct the user to a specific action. So build an interactive story. Think about the beginning experience of your game. Who are the characters in your game? Engage with your users with back and forth conversations instead of using commands. As I said, leverage the visuals. So the visuals can be used as a secondary layer. Your voice is the main driver where the user is interacting with your conversation, and the visuals will actually give the users visual cues, hints, or show them points of interest with UI, right? So if you're coming from a voice game world, take advantage of the fact that visuals can be more efficient at showcasing interactions. You need to also design and optimize your web application based on the display. So design with a specific viewing distance in mind. Use a minimum font size of 32 pt or for primary text. Use a minimum 24.4 secondary text. Okay, so here you can see within the slide a simple example, right? This was typically built using just voice, and with interactive canvas, you can actually see how these different characters within the screen are showing them some visual cues. You can see within with true or false, you can see how those characters are hinting at different values as well as the state of the game. Finally, make sure to take advantage of visuals to indicate whose turn it is. So let's say if you have um, 6 players in a room, and you're playing this specific game, right? So use the visuals like icons or characters within the screen to indicate whose turn it is to actually start speaking. So add social elements within your game. So, and also take into consideration that you can actually take advantage of the fact that multiple people can play with unique inputs just using their voice. So while designing your game, and if it is a multiplayer game, make sure that you use visual cues and characters to represent each different person. So it's easy for people to actually interact with. Again, users can still get lost, so redirect them back. So very often every user would be tempted to say something that's out of context of what the game would be. So you can see, as part of that specific scenario, it's up to you as a developer to make sure that you handle those kind of errors. Who are you talking to? So in this case, out of somewhere the user said, smell the flowers. So who are you talking to? Try asking me to read the next passage. So you're redirecting the user back to a specific action. So instead of this, if you would have put a generic error message like, sorry, I cannot understand, or I did not get that, the user doesn't know what is the next conversation that he needs to speak. So that's very important over here. Now, finally, we talked about a lot of things when it comes to visual games. We talked about design principles. But the main thing that we didn't cover yet is how can we make it more immersive and engaging, right? So when you're building voice conversations, you can notice that pretty much after a certain point, when you keep hearing the same thing over and over again, you just get the voice response back from the assistant or your action. Now, if you can make it a little more engaging for the user every time that they interact with your action, that would be an amazing and an awesome experience, right? So there's a very easy way to actually handle that. That is actually done using SSML or sound libraries. So SSML is nothing but speech synthesis markup language. Just like HTML, you can actually go ahead and use SSML within your conversation as a conversation response. Now, what this would typically mean is, let's say instead of just having a conversation response like, um, "Hi, welcome to so and so application. For today's game, this is gonna be about XYZ. So choose which one you would like." Now, when you're having a conversation like this, of course, my voice is not as engaging and immersive like the Google Assistant. I wish I had that, but you can actually leverage SSML as well. So with SSML, what you can do is you can actually you can change the pitch of what your response is. You can actually have represent your speech in different things. So for example, let's have a look at this. So anything that you do should be surrounded by the speak tags. Within the speak tags, you can see the first thing that's there is say as characters SSML. So instead of interpreting this as a word, since we have interpret as characters, it will say SSML. Now the break time over here, which is 3 seconds, represents that, okay, we have SSML, wait for 3 seconds and go to the next part. And the next part over here is an audio file. So this can actually start playing a specific music behind the scene, right? So just like that, there's a whole lot of things that you can do with SSML. So I'm very interested to see what you guys can do with SSML as a response. And to show that, I will actually show you a simple example. So think about this. A typical response without SSML over here will be, "Come and welcome to the terrifying world of the imagination." Now, imagine this. As I'm speaking right now, when you say, "Hey G, talk to my game action," if my response or if the action's response was only, "Come and welcome to the terrifying world of the imagination," that's pretty monotonous in terms of what the experience is all about. But with SSML, let's actually have an example of this.
Come in. Welcome to the terrifying world of the imagination.
So as you can see, just with this response, you just saw that, okay, welcome to the terrifying world of the imagination, but it had a background theme to it. So a distant thunder, and as even before the thunder music closes, you had an alien growl, and before that ends, you also have like someone walking on the wood, the door closing, and then you have the message being read to you with a different tone, and then the alien grunt sleeping again with all of a ringing ambient background. So with all of this, you can immediately come to know that this game is all about something to do with a spooky scenario, right? So it's to do with that specific theme set. So as a user, that's more engaging from a user experience standpoint. So this is what it would look like. We use parallel media tags. So you can define when the media would start and when it would end. So you can see over here, the internet was invented by cats. So start that after question, this media element plus 2 seconds. So end that plus 2 seconds, play this one. And then you can add other scores behind the scenes. So if you wonder where can I find all of these sound libraries, it's all available in this specific link. Go to Actions, Tools, Sound Library. You'll find a whole lot of sounds or musics or background scores that you can use to make your actions more engaging. So from a game category standpoint, we have word games, so visual puzzles, word for voice responses. Then the Snowman Game. So go and search for Snowman Game in GitHub. You'll get to see an example of this specific game, which is powered by interactive canvas. You'll get to see the entire code over there, how this works. Persistent games. And then finally, before I even go on to the final slides, I have a question over here. I think, can we see some practical examples to help us understand the capabilities of interactive canvas? Sure. So what I'll do over here is quickly shift to a demo that I have recorded. So as you can see over here, this one is a screencast from my phone. So this was talk to my test app. So when I say talk to my test app,
Getting the test version of my test app.
now you can see that immediately I paused it for a second just so that I explain the interactive canvas. So the moment I say talk to my test app, it has identified that, okay, for this user, I need to hand actions on Google will handle that and give it to Dialogflow. Dialogflow will understand, okay, I need to trigger the welcome intent and what is there under the welcome intent. Now within the welcome intent, I would have a response for that specific intent as a HTML response. Within that HTML response, I would then show I would load the URL of my web app, which is this, along with a data or state of the game. So this might be a welcome state, right? So then it would go back to the web application is rendered on the screen. It loads the Interactive Canvas API. Interactive Canvas API receives the data through the callbacks, registered callbacks, and then we have visual information displayed on the screen based on those callbacks. I hope that makes sense. So let's actually go ahead and continue with this. So this game was designed using Three.js.
Hey, you're back. Let's get the game rolling. Here is your first question. Which is the third planet from the sun?
Planet Earth.
That is correct. It is Earth. Planet Earth is the third planet from the sun. Which planet in our solar system takes about 11.9 years to orbit the sun?
Is it Jupiter?
That is correct. It is Jupiter.
So as you can see, based on the different conversations that I'm having, I'm not interacting with the application through click over here. I'm basically having a conversation within the application. It then understands that based on each answer that I sent, the interactive canvas sends it back to my Dialogflow, to the webhook and fulfillment. And through the backend logic, when I receive that the answer is Earth, which is correct, then you could also see over here, the robot, based on the answer, it would change the state and show a thumbs up. You can also see if I did something wrong, it will shake the head and say it's a wrong.
The planet from this. Get that. So let's try this again. Which is the third planet from the sun?
Mars. So you can see I'm using SSML with some audio response behind the scenes. You can see how my robot was nodding, saying that that's not the right answer. So you have a more immersive and visual experience uh, using interactive canvas. So your visuals over here give you informations or cues of what's actually going, and your majorly this entire game, as you can see, is driven by voice. So that's how it should be when building visual games or immersive games for the Google Assistant. Now with that, let's go back into the slides. So if you want to get started, I would recommend these videos. So how to build actions for smart displays. I would also look into how to build interactive canvas games for the Google Assistant. Have a look at this specific session as well. And the slides also contain a lot of other demos that I have, not just specific to interactive canvas, but also where we use some of these tutorials can be links back to my Medium post or website showing you how you can combine machine learning with conversational actions. You can also integrate the Google Assistant into your own hardware. So you can also see some of these tutorials on my site. So finally, I would also like to give some important information. If you'd like to reach out, connect with me on Twitter. If you like Medium, as you can see, if you'd like to get started with interactive canvas, go to my Medium. The links are already provided in, so the links are already provided in the comments. So make sure that you have access to the slides. And even in terms of the interactive canvas, if you want to get started with basic information, the entire code with screenshots is available. So feel free to go through this tutorial step by step, where you can build an interactive canvas application. So over here towards the end, you can see it covers all the basics. And once your application is running, this is a simple app where a triangle is rotating with a specific color. So you can say change the color to blue and it changes that. Or you can say pause spinning, it would stop that. So with this simple example, it covers all the basic or core components or features of the interactive canvas API, which will allow you to actually build your own applications from scratch. Also would highly encourage you guys to go ahead and go through these, including the sample application over here, and also the guidelines. So the interactive canvas, when you build for the interactive canvas, it will go through some review process as well. But make sure, the major thing to keep in mind, make sure you design actions that are based on games. So gaming experience is being approved at this point. And make sure that you don't use your applications like a traditional web application. Design it just to show the visuals and cues. And finally, I would also like to kind of let you guys know that if you guys are interested in more tutorials like these, I would be actually I've started a YouTube channel, which is called Tech with Such. So go to youtube.com/techwithsuch. And I have tutorials on how to build actions from scratch. So make sure you go through this tutorial, which would actually give you the basics of how to build a voice conversation application. And then I have another video that's coming out this week. We'll also be covering interactive canvas in the upcoming days as well. So make sure you do that. So how can I contact you to ask my questions? So I have one of the comments there. So Mohammed, you can actually contact me, connect with me through Twitter, send me a direct message, and I'll do my best to get back to you with a response. And with that, yes, I will also leave the links in the slides. So make sure the YouTube links would also be there. So if you like, subscribe to the channel. And I'm sure with the Google MENA Digital Days. We have a lot of speakers with a lot of topics that's being covered on a day-to-day basis. So make sure to subscribe to that channel and go through with those specific topics as well. So with that, I think we've come to the end of today's session. It was an honor. At the same time, I would like to see you guys, to see what you guys build. So for anything to get started with, this slide, one slide is enough for you to go through all that is required when it comes to building actions for the Google Assistant. So thank you, and see you guys in the next one.